practices using supportive technology and personalized learning. She's now consulted with 8 schools as they've implemented the blended learning model. She is the director of Divine Providence Academy in the Diocese of Grand Rapids, Michigan. Divine Providence Academy is in its 5th full year of implementation. Kendra has worked in the public sector as the founder and director of InnoAcademy from 2006 to 11, a global charter school. She spent time with the Water Winds in Nigeria, as well as operating InnoAcademy in Mexico 2006 through 2011. She's also been math and science curriculum coordinator for K-12 district in West Michigan, and began her teaching career in the middle school with science, reading, math classroom. Kendra earned her BA in elementary education from Central Michigan University and her Master of Educational Leadership from Grand Valley State University. Kendra. Andrea is also with us. Andrea Hall is the Assistant Director of Curriculum Assessment and Instruction and the English Language Arts teacher at Divine Providence Academy. They are in the Diocese of Grand Rapids for grades 1st through 5th grade. She is in her 8th year of teaching. She has a bachelor's degree in English. Reading is her passion, and she loves passing the love of books on to her students. She's nearing completion of her reading specialist master's degree at the Grand Valley State University. She teaches RCIA at her church in Grand Haven, Michigan. She is married and has a 1.5-year-old son, Oliver.
He's super cute, by the way. I forgot that. We're here to talk to you about our school, Divine Providence Academy. Can you hear me back there?
Not very well.
Not very well? Better?
Much better.
Okay, good. I'll try to stick in this area. You'll hear a lot of the stuff from this morning paralleled in what we do, so we were really excited to hear some of that stuff. But you'll hear a lot of different stuff as well, because I think we're very different. Ours is not diocese-wide. It is 3 schools that have come together and have worked on this model. Vision, and maybe you'll see some similarities within your schools with us. So we were 3 schools, St. Catherine, St. Joseph's, and St. Michael's. And I taught at St. Catherine's. We were all within about 15 minutes of each other. So we were not very far away. They were rural parishes, rural schools, and they weren't doing so well. We had families with strong traditions. They loved their school. They sent their kids there for great education, for a Catholic education, but also because they went there, their grandparents went there, and so their kids are going to go there. And I think that was really important too. So they wanted to keep their schools. And so we were faced with, how do we keep these 3 schools who are being told you might not make it? And I think it was really scary to a lot of people. Have you guys been in any of those situations where some of your schools just aren't quite going to make it and it was really scary?
In fact, the bishop had said, you either figure out a way to work this out or you will be closed. And this was in June, and you'll be closed by September if you don't figure out something.
Yeah.
So we have a little sense of urgency.
Each school had a full-time principal, a full-time secretary, janitors, and we had really small class sizes, which, oh, that sounds great. Like we kind of talked about this morning, but 1-4 in one classroom. A teacher with 4 kindergartners.
To educate was right around $12,000 a student with that model.
And the average classes were 10 to 12 students, except for the kindergarten. We had split classes at the time. So we got a new superintendent, and he called what I like to call the town hall meetings. And he invited us all there, parents, community members, teachers, and there we found out that our schools could be closing. And it was terrifying. And he said, but wait, I'm going to propose something to you. And he proposed that we would take the 3 schools and combine them to one principal, and that we would cut our teaching staff in half. Principals, parents, community members, teachers were freaking out when they heard that, right?
This was news to everybody in the room. No one had been prepped.
We were just told, show up at these meetings, we have something to tell you. And so, you know, you want your teachers on board, you want your staff on board. And so when they find out that half of them will not be there in maybe a year or two, they're not going to portray, right, panic. Like I said, angry staff, angry parents, people are screaming and, not screaming, but they're screaming at our new superintendent. They are crying because they're impassioned about their individual principals, about their individual teachers who they love and they love their school. And are we going to miss our buildings that are part of our small communities and are so important to us? And that was really hard. So I think it was overwhelming, and I think the lesson to learn from that is a slower approach. We heard that this morning, like, June, let's just go. I have this new idea. And he was a few days into his job. I think he kept saying, I'm day 8 or something like that.
Yeah.
And
he was kind of handed this and said, here's your first task.
right, he was put in a really bad position. He was new and said, you need to tell everybody, go. School's coming. So a lesson to learn from that was maybe a little too fast and aggressive. Or a concept of a new model. It hadn't been developed yet, which was really a struggle for us to hear. You're gonna do something, it's gonna be neat, it's gonna be cool. It could be all these things. We're working on it, we'll let you know. But keep supporting us.
And we have 4 months to figure it out.
Right. So that first year, a couple months into the school year, our 3 principals became 1 principal. So 2 of the principals are let go. And one was retirement age and kind of took on retirement. But that's still hard because the communities who lost their principal really struggled with, we were so happy, what's wrong with this? We love our person. And so it was really hard to unify those 3 schools and make it seem okay just to have the one. All the teachers and secretaries were kept for that first year, and we made multi-age classrooms. So we had kindergarten through 2nd grade, a 3rd through 5th, and in one of the buildings, a middle school 6th through 8. So from kindergarten all on its own, that was a big shift to join the older kids. There was a lot of controversy with that with parents. They weren't sure if they were quite ready for that. It turned out okay, just a glimpse into the future. But it was a struggle for them to grasp that idea. The older ones, I think less so, because they were used to the split grades, but the kindergarten was a big transition, I think, for us. We saw in that first year really told a lot about the teaching staff. There was poor work ethic towards people striving to try to figure out what we were going to be. We didn't know in this first year. We just knew we were going to be something new. And we had to figure it out. We didn't have as much leadership over us in each building. So some people took advantage of that, maybe not purposefully, but when you don't have someone breathing down your neck and you're not a leader.
Principals don't do that, though.
No, I'm just kidding. She really doesn't. But that's why her staff now stands out, because they don't need someone breathing down their neck. They're very capable people. And you really started to see a divide in people of who could be in situations and have some, I want to say not necessarily even leadership, but independence, and not have that person to lean on as much in the building every single day, every single hour. And then there was attitude. And I think you talked about attitude this morning, how important that is. There was angry people who are still not happy. And I'm talking staff about the changes, and it really affected their performance and their outcome in the end, because they were angry that they lost their principal. They were angry at what the next year would be. They were changing something that had been in place for anyone in each of the communities could remember. And that was really a struggle. But then there were people who were accepting and flexible, and they thought of new things. And I like to think of myself as one of those people because I'm still here. Me and my teaching partner at the St. Catharines campus right now, there were 4 of us in the building, and we knew the next year was going to be 2. And we spent a lot of time talking about how could we make this work, because we didn't know what we were going to do. So it was a lot of talk. How can we have 3 grades in one room? How can we do all these things that we're not even quite sure what we're going to do next? So I think that really stood out, that we took the time to be okay with trying something new and thinking about what that could be and being part of the process. So we visited a lot of schools, any of them that we could at least. There wasn't a lot like us in our area in Michigan. We traveled a few hours many times. We visited a one-room schoolhouse, but it was still a public school. It was a very different approach, but they had, you know, multi-age classrooms within the one same building. And then we visited Inno Academy, where we met Kendra, and they had a lot of the things that we were thinking, that's what we wanted to do. They weren't exactly what we wanted to do. They weren't a Catholic school, and so that wasn't a component. But they had a lot of things that made us think and opened our eyes. And so Kendra was not part of us at the time. We kind of stole her later. Yeah, that was the really hard time. That wasn't the fun time to be part of. We visited there twice because they were doing so many things. We would walk into classrooms and we would see kids moving around to different groups. Maybe they were in this reading group that was predominantly third graders, but they were a fourth grader. But in math, they were right at fourth grade level. But in social studies, they knew a lot and they were a fifth grade or whatever. But they were moving around to kind of meet the individual students' needs. And we were like, oh, that's kind of what we were thinking. We want to meet individual students' needs. And this was the first place that we had seen anything like that. So we really hung on to that place a little bit. Technology. So we were told, you will be technology-based. Maybe you'll be satellite schools. Maybe kids will learn from teachers from somewhere else, but so they can stay in their own buildings because the communities were very connected to their building. Do you have any communities like that where, you know, it wouldn't quite work to move all the kids to a new building? Yes,
Yeah, our superintendent describes it as, he said, you know, everybody was all about the consolidation as long as it was at their building. Yeah. And so kind of, we coined the phrase before, this was prior to blended learning. Blended learning kind of came later for us, but we thought it would be really helpful to kind of give you the backstory so you kind of know where we've been and where we are now. He referred to it as a virtual merger of 3 schools coming together, staying at their physical locations, but sharing some of those operational resources and things to make us more efficient. Because $12,000 a student, number one, the students weren't paying that, the families weren't paying that $12,000. A majority of that was all being supported by these small rural parishes. You know, upwards of 80% of their Sunday collections were going to support the school. So the schools in that instance were really a burden on the parish. And we know that it works best when they're in, you know, support of one another, and they were a drain on the parishes. So we kind of coined this as a virtual merger. We knew technology was going to need to be involved, just didn't know how that was going to work.
So because we didn't know how it was going to work, we had this really great group of very well-meaning parents. We all have them. They're like, I'll do anything for you. Let me do all this. I'm in charge. You're overwhelmed. You're placed with new stuff. It's like, great, go ahead, these parents. And they bought a lot of stuff that we never used. They bought a lot of stuff that we were trained on for hours of time, and we never used. Because we were still developing who we were going to be.
State of the art technology at the time and resources, and made the classrooms look beautiful. People would walk in and be like, wow.
We had 3 TVs and a projector in every room. So you walk around and you're seeing everything on every screen around you. Because the idea was that they were going to work in these pods and they were going to do this. We had these classroom clickers and they were going to do these different things. But the 2 ideas didn't even meld together when you think about the ideas of them. If you're teaching a small group, why would you need a classroom clicker set where you're monitoring what the class gave from it? I mean, so they really opposed each other. And again, the parents meant so well, but we spent so much money on technology and some of it just sits in the room kind of dusty to this day. In fact, we're working on possibly selling some of it because it's good stuff, it's quality things. But you know, the lessons we learned from that is they didn't check with the teachers or even the leadership at the time to really know what they were going to use it for. They just said, oh, we saw this at this school, we saw this at this school had this. We're gonna get it all because we're gonna be the best, right? We're trying to say these schools So we need to look the best. And it pains me to look back at the money, so maybe we couldn't get other things, maybe curriculum-wise that we really needed, and the time that we spent in PD that could have been more focused on students over this random technology that was bought. Because we bought it, you better use it. So the next year was pared down. Halfway through the school year, the principal at the time was struggling. It literally made him sick to run the 3 schools physically. He had pneumonia, he had the flu, he had like a foot that acted up just from like overstress. It was a position that was not meant for anyone. So I think what we learned from that is it really takes, and he was with him in maybe a traditional setting, but being put in the stress of running 3 schools, still figuring out your model, and not having background in anything other than traditional education that the Catholic schools have been doing, he stressed himself out, and it literally made him sick, and it was really sad to see. So about halfway through the year, he left us, and one of those well-meaning parents gave Kendra a call and said, we need you, at least for a few months. Was it 10 hours a week?
I really think it was the Holy Spirit calling me, and I'll tell that part of the story a little bit later in the presentation.
But how many hours were you there the first?
10 hours a week.
10 hours a week. And a lot of it was more consulting. Tell us what we do in the classrooms, because the teachers needed some guidance, and we lacked guidance in this new model that we weren't sure what it was yet. So we did a lot of trial and error, and that's one of the things that I love about Kendra. We're allowed to do new things. And when it doesn't work, it's okay to throw it out the window immediately. You don't have to wait around and forever and keep doing something that you know is not working. And it's okay to make the shift, because you're doing what's best for students and you're meeting their personal needs. And if you're not meeting their needs with something, it's not worth, it's that wasted time of those technology hours that we spent that's not doing anything for us. And so that's something I really appreciate. We tried out lots of different technology and programs. We were just talking about one, CS 2020?
CSK 12.
CSK 12. CSK 12.
It no longer exists.
Don't look it up, it's not worth your time. It failed miserably for our students. They hated it hated us, I think. And it just wasn't something that was good. We found some other great problems. So it was just a process of trying things out.
But again, thousands of dollars.
Thousands of dollars. We always stress, and to this day, that technology is not the teacher. Because I think you've probably heard it. We don't want our kids learning from a computer. They can do that at home. They're on the computer enough at home. They have all their devices. We use it as a tool. What they're hearing from me, it's being reinforced. They do their program on the computer. They come to me. We're working on math. They're like, oh, I saw that on our iReady program. And they're able to move more quickly because they've already understand it. They may even already have mastery of it. So year 3, I kind of feel like we became complete. Year 3. I mean, that's a ways down the road, but when you think about where we came from, not knowing what we were going to do, if we were going to close, that first year still could have closed. We didn't know. We were kind of just by the skin of our teeth. So Kendra officially joined us. We bullied her into it, and we made her stay forever. And we had to choose a new name because we were running as 3 schools. You can't pick one building. You can't pick one of those names. And you can never make anyone happy. You can just make some people happy when you're choosing between 3 things. Everybody kind of has their side. So we voted, and we kept the 3 campuses. We'll still call them St. Catherine's Campus. That's still the name of that building. But as a school, we're Divine Providence Academy. We had teachers teach in multiple buildings. We have always, well, not always, starting then, we looked at teacher strengths and where they could be used and how they could be used. Currently, our religion teacher, Sister Ann, she travels between our currently 2 buildings because she is the best person on our staff to teach our children religion. In my building, There are 2 teachers. I teach all of the ELA, and the other teacher teaches all of math. In the other building, it's not quite the same. Just because we are the same school and the same model doesn't mean every building and classroom has to look alike. It means that we need to be doing what's best for our students with what we have. We began to look at data, and that's a lot where Kendra came in too. When she was at InnoAcademy, they were showing us how they used the data to teach the kids, how they knew what to teach them, where to place them in their different groups. Because I talked about some were here in reading and some were here in math, and that didn't always mean that they were moved up a whole grade level. That meant that they were working where they belonged to be working. We began to individualize lesson plans. Reading levels, we didn't use Basil's. Math was taught either in small groups or to individuals, depending on the student. Students were allowed to work above their grade level where appropriate. We talked a lot about social appropriateness for students. You may have a very smart student who excels maybe in math, and they're a 2nd grader, but they're in 3rd or 4th grade math. They've mastered everything beforehand. But is it appropriate to have them in a 3rd or 4th grade classroom? Maybe not. But that doesn't mean in your classroom they can't still work on those concepts. And that's something we spend a lot of time looking at. Year 4 was a hard year because we lost one of our 3 buildings. They had to close. They had 7 students sign up for the following year. The other buildings had kind of started to level out. You have that beginning panic of people. No, I don't want that. I'm leaving, I'm gone, I'm done. But by that 3rd, 4th year, people are sticking around and they're seeing it works. And they're happy, and they're so happy that their school is still there and thriving. But one of our buildings wasn't. And so we had to look at what was different about that building. Luckily, those students, we saved 5 of them, I said, yes. We saved 5 of the 7 students, and they were able to come to one of our other buildings, and so we were so happy to keep them. But as we were looking, the school of St. Michael's, that building that closed, they hadn't had a consistent, you said 3 years? Pastor for 3 years. So when we talk about pastor support being so important, they didn't have the pastor support.
They didn't even have a pastor. It was like a pastoral appointed administrator. So there was no religious support really in that building. And then they had a traveling priest that would come every Sunday for services.
Some of the staff members at that building were not on board from the beginning. So new staff was brought in, and it was very hard for the parents of the school and the parish staff to welcome these new teachers with open arms because they were mad that their school, as they knew it, wasn't there anymore. And that was really hard. And the other buildings had been more accepting. They had the strong leadership of a strong pastor who supported the school. And when we look at the big differences, those were the big differences, the attitudes and the support of their pastor. Who we became after a lot of work. I feel that we're in such a stronger place than when I look back at that 5 years ago. We look at each child and work to create individualized plans, personalized education. We meet the needs of each student as much as possible. We've actually seen that help with behavior in school. We had a lot of students who, you know, you always have that parent that says, my kid's doing that because they're so smart, right? We've all heard that. In some cases, it's true. And we kind of have proof of that because the more we challenge students and they're not bored in that lesson, the better their behavior is. Does that mean we take every behavior problem and it's magically perfect? No. But it has helped tremendously in a lot of the behavior problems. So when you look at classroom management maybe being more of a struggle in your mind to do that station rotation or to be pulling students and out of that traditional whole class sense, we've actually found that it's helped our classroom management and the behaviors that we see in the classroom. We take advantage of the benefits of multi-age classroom. We love the way that the older kids are leaders for younger kids. We love the way that the younger kids look up to the older kids and strive higher to reach what they're doing, because I want to be in the green level of books. My friend's reading that book and that looks really good. And so we see them reaching a little higher. We look at student data. We base what we're doing upon that. We strive to create just right class sizes. So at the beginning, I told you about the K2, the 3-5, and the 6-8 classrooms. But sometimes that changes, and sometimes that's year to year. We currently this year did a early childhood classroom, and right now that contains preschool, young fives, and kindergarten, because a lot of our preschoolers are part-time. Our preschool teacher was a full-time teacher in both buildings, but their afternoons sometimes consisted of one student who mostly napped. Are we using the staff that we have to their greatest potential? We have a 1st and 2nd grade room and then a 3rd through 5th grade room. At the other building, we have one room that has 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and another room that has 3rd, 4th, 5th. We split up the 3rd graders because it was more appropriate for some of those 3rd graders to be in a 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade room. Still working on 3rd grade standards, or above if needed. And the 3, 4, 5 room, making sure they've mastered those 3rd grade standards. But in one or more areas often, they're working higher, so it's more appropriate for them to be in that room. Again, I talked about we use the teacher's greatest strengths in their teaching. Not every classroom or building might be set up the same, and it might be different every year. It depends on our students and what works best for them. And we're not afraid to try new things. And thankfully, we have a leader who lets us try new things if we come to her, and in fact encourages us to try new things and not necessarily always do the same dinosaur lesson every year just because it's really cool. Things that work for us are having teachers and computer-based programs teaching the students just right to their level. We use iReady, which is a math and reading program. It teaches the lessons, it gives them guided practice, and it gives them mini quizzes at the end. And again, I always love during a math lesson when my student says, oh, I saw that on iReady, and I'm like, yes. That means we have something to work from. It's not necessarily all new. We know that we have some students who work better from a computer. We know that we have some students that work better one-on-one with the teacher or in a small group. Students are given the opportunity to learn both ways, and you're reaching more learners that way. Holt McDougall is an online program that we use in our middle school. It has online videos. And so in class during math workshop time in our middle school, they watch the videos, they work through the math, and the teacher is there to meet one-on-one with students in areas where they're struggling. So they're moving forward in their middle school, in the middle school of math at their own level. And he's also working on some of his own videos because he feels like maybe the other ones are a little lengthy or he can teach it in another way. And I think always any opportunity that you can meet a student in a different way is a positive, because like we said, not every student can learn the exact same way. We're all different learners. There are a lot of leveled reading programs out there, and one of them we use is Newsela, and it's current event online articles. And the whole class can read the same article, and they're very, very current articles. But it'll level them at their grade level, at their reading level. And so the whole class can discuss the same article, but you can meet them at their just right learning level. Reading A to Z is not necessarily an online program. They have online components. They have a whole online RAS where the kids can read to the computer or from the computer. But again, it's a leveled program. Scope Storyworks Junior has some great articles, and they even level the work as well when we're looking at different, they have lower levels, higher levels, and again, so your students can all participate in the same work, but meeting their individual needs. Individualized math and reading work, and especially specifically in math, students don't move on from a concept until they've mastered it, until they understand it. And a lot of the pushback that we got in the beginning from parents was that I have a really lazy student. They don't want to work ahead. So why would they? And we've seen the opposite, and thankfully we can now prove it to parents that they work farther, because it's not maybe necessarily that your student was lazy or didn't want to do it. It's they missed the concept before and the class moved on. And so what are they to do? Because they don't have the skills to scaffold up and to build up to the next concept. And personalized expectations for students' work. Not all students will necessarily have, and especially when you look at a multi-age room, the same expectations for their work. If you have a kindergartner and a second grader working on the same writing assignment, you would expect their story, their narrative to look very different, but have the same components that you're teaching all of the students. That differentiation is so important, even if you have a single grade classroom. Even in a third grade classroom, even in a fifth grade classroom, you have so many different levels of students and where they're at. And differentiating what you expect out of them or the work that you give them is so important so they're successful and they're able to grow. And technology part 2. So we've come a long way in our technology. We don't purchase trial by error. We don't purchase items that we know we're not going to use. We are one-to-one with Chromebooks and netbooks. We're moving all towards Chromebooks. For a management purpose, they can all be updated from one and reasons like that. But our testing and iReady, those programs run through a Chromebook opposed to an iPad, so they were more useful for us. Teachers and students use many web-based programs on a daily basis. Our testing is the NWA MAPS. We do it online 3 times a year, and we immediately use that data for our students. We've dabbled in coding, and our tech guy would love to do more with that with our students. He says, you know, it's our future, and I think it is. And so it's important to look at the future. You know, we don't necessarily need a typing class anymore. Students are on computers. They know how to use them. They know how to use tablets, but they need to do things that are pushing us into the future. So we're starting to look at those things. They enhance those skills that you might find in a typing class by doing something like an online chat session in Google Classroom, and they're talking about something that we've read, and they have so much more to say when they can do it on a computer than if they have to do it in front of a whole class. We get everyone involved that way, which my students have really liked this year. And we have one person in our 2 schools now that oversees technology, because at the beginning, another hiccup was everybody was trying to fix everything. Even though they didn't really have any background or know what they were doing, they were troubleshooting themselves, and it caused a lot of problems. And so having one main person for something like technology has really helped. Kendra has to switch slides. She's going to pick up a little more on the how we do it, the what we do it. Mine was just kind of our journey.
All right. I just wanted to share with you a little bit about my background. As Father McGuire was saying this morning, in Catholic schools, we have to be better than the public school, and we also have to be better than all the charters that are popping up. We do have charter schools in Michigan, and that is a huge point of competition for us, because people recognize that they may be a better alternative to some of our public schools, and they're still free. So that's a big challenge for us. I fortunately have had the experience to work in all 3 areas, the public, the charter, and now the Catholic schools. So I feel like I can bash on public school and bash on charter schools because I've lived it. So I came to the Diocese of Grand Rapids. I had fallen away from the church. We were born, is that better? Okay. I was born and raised Catholic. When I got married, we moved to an area where there wasn't a Catholic school or a Catholic church close to us. So I kind of, have always had that upbringing, but we moved to a very predominantly Christian Reformed area. And in fact, the closest Catholic church, and this isn't an excuse, and Father Fred tells me that all the time, was about 25 miles away from where my husband and I lived. So it wasn't a practical option for us. When I was at Inno Academy, which was a charter school, the folks from which is now Divine Providence, found me and they came to visit, and I really loved their enthusiasm, and I thought it was great. They asked really good questions. I thought, wow, these people, they really get it, and that's really exciting. A private school is starting to embrace some of these things that, has been best practice in public schools now, at least in our area, for a few years. And so it was exciting that they were willing to kind of open up and maybe get on board with that. So I went on my merry way. They came and visited twice. During that time, I think the Holy Spirit works on all of us. In this case, I had to be hit upside the head a couple times before I realized that the Holy Spirit was working in my life. I had decided that it was going to be best for my family. I have 2 children. Right now, Madison is a freshman at West Catholic High School, so she's 14, and my son Brady is 12, and he's at Divine Providence Academy. He's a 7th grader. Both of my children have always been wherever I've been at school. But long story short, it was needed for me to be home because my husband had taken on a new position, and both of us couldn't justify working 80 hours a week. Somebody had to kind of take that responsibility for the home front. So I took a leave of absence from the charter school. And Facebook is an amazing thing because one of the parents who was so gung-ho about what I was doing at Inno Academy found me on Facebook and started kind of stalking me and saying, what are you doing? Well, I'm at home, and I'm kind of taking this year to figure out, where my path is going to take me. And she said, well, I know where your path is going to take you. Your path is going to take you, to our school. And I was like, no, I don't think so. I don't really see that, playing out. And so through lots of conversations, I agreed to kind of come on as a consultant to help support the teachers, because the teachers were dying in this model. They had been given all this technology and lots of training, but no practical applications for how do I lesson plan with it? How do I, I've been thrown in this classroom with 3 grade levels, and no one has told me how to even manage the curriculum for that. So I'm trying to teach everything that I taught before times 3. So that was a challenge. So I agreed to 10 hours a week to come work with those schools. And it's been the best decision that I have ever made in my career. It's been the best decision for our family. We are back practicing Catholics, which has been awesome. And I can't imagine being anywhere else and ever going back to the charter schools or the public schools. And we all know I took a good pay cut to come do this. But like Father McGuire was saying, it's not about the money. For me, it's about joy at work and feeling like I can really make a difference. And when we talk about Divine Providence Academy and some of the other schools that I work with, I think it's so exciting that kids can get a top-notch education and get to be with God all day. That's awesome. I mean, what parent doesn't want that for their kids? But we haven't, unfortunately, Catholic schools, we haven't really figured out how to market that the best way possible. And so, people that are adopting some of these practices are kind of like these well-known kept secrets that nobody's out there sharing. And so we're here today from our perspective, just to kind of share with you our journey. Hopefully you probably saw a lot of things that you wouldn't do, and that's why we shared it with you. Andrea wasn't up here to kind of tell you this is the way you should do it. I don't think that that's the case. But when I was asked by your diocese to come and kind of talk to you about blended learning, it was kind of like, what are the next steps? And so I'm going to do kind of a more practical lecture with you today that's going to talk about kind of your planning process And I'm going to walk you through the steps and the things that I think you need to be mindful of if you are looking to embrace some blended learning and some innovation in your Catholic schools. We were not a consortium. We didn't have, that luxury. So we've kind of come up with that on our own. I'm currently working with 11 schools across the United States that have all adopted blended learning. And so I've kind of packaged with their support, kind of how I would go about working with any other schools. And so I'm going to share everything that I have with you today, and in hopes that you'll be able to think about it and kind of set your own plan for how you want to implement this. If at any point in the conversations, if I'm not making sense or you need clarification, or you have questions, don't hesitate to pop your hand up and ask. I'm really here to serve you and just try to share some of my experiences. That was kind of a long introduction. Sorry about that. I thought that it would be good to kind of give you a visual. This is our St. Joseph campus. And from the outside, we look like a very traditional Catholic school. This building was built in, I think it's 1910. It used to serve as the church. The church has since built across the parking lot, and so we are filling up that building. And I think, to kind of talk about where our name came from, it is very important in our communities, especially in the rural communities. Like Andrea said, we have great-great-grandparents that went to this school, that we honor that tradition, because we have a lot of families that say, well, it worked for me, why do you have to change it? So trying to be mindful of the traditions that are in place and the rich history of our school. But then we felt that it was so important to really look at opportunity and say we're open to Providence. I feel like we always talk about Providence did provide, Providence can provide, and Providence will provide. That's kind of the motto of our school. And although we've struggled through a lot of these challenges, we have come out better because of it. And so we're saying we're going to honor the tradition, but we are open to change. We are open to kind of taking Catholic schools in a new direction. This is kind of a picture that sums up what our classrooms look like on the inside, which does not look like a traditional Catholic school. We have tables in all of our classrooms, so all of our students are in collaborative groups. This little guy here is on the computer using it as a tool to work through some long division math problems. And I think it's just important to recognize that on the outside, we look very traditional, but on the inside, we like to think that we're being very innovative. So just to kind of show you some of the other schools that we've been able to impact and partner with across the United States. Those are kind of the places that I've been. Sioux Falls, I think was it like 2 hours from here? I was just there 2 weeks ago, and someone said, oh yeah, I got to run to Omaha this weekend. And I was like, hey, I'm going to be there in a couple of weeks. How far is it? And she told me, and it's pretty cool that it's so close. So they're the latest school that I've taken on. And they're looking at doing more of a, this is kind of their pilot school. And then they're looking at more of a diocesan-wide adoption in the next year after the school year. So to kind of get everybody on the same page, I think it's important to kind of clarify what we believe at Divine Providence Academy based on lots of research and best practice. What is excellence in schools? We work very closely with the University of Notre Dame as well, the Alliance for Catholic Education, and they've kind of helped us frame this based on all of their resources and background. So kind of what we feel distinguishes one school from another as far as being excellent is strong leadership, school culture, data-driven instruction, instructional coaching, PLCs and professional development, enrollment and financial strategies. You're planning, you're out there, you're marketing on the streets, you're talking to people. We at our school don't have Father McGuire. I have a very supportive pastor, but we don't have millions of dollars. And there's not even millions of dollars for us to tap into. in our geographical location. So our financial strategies and enrollment probably looks very different from what they're doing with the Drexel schools, but we still have a strategy. And I think that that's the important thing. You have to have a plan, and your plan needs to be based on knowing your audience, knowing what is available, knowing what is out there, and going after it. And then I kind of highlighted the blended learning because we're seeing that schools that are getting excellent results have really adopted blended learning. And like Father McGuire said this morning, are using it with fidelity, and they're being very intentional. It's not just buying great technology and having it in your classroom, but it's how you use that technology and what you do with it. This kind of comes from some research that Notre Dame did. They brought in what they recognized in public, charter, and private schools, kind of the highest performing, best, well-known schools around. And they kind of looked at what common practices were in place in these amazing schools. And these were the 7 things that they could identify that was really making them be top performing schools. So when I work with schools, blended learning is part of what we do, but we also look at, I don't think Divine Providence Academy, my school, would be where it is today if we hadn't adopted all of those things. And the number one, strong leadership, is not because of me, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It's a different kind of model. One of the things that when we talk about the strong leadership, when Notre Dame pulled all of those wonderful superintendents together that were overseeing all these excellent schools, they put the job description of a Catholic school principal down in front of them. They didn't tell them what the job description was for. And as the gurus were reading it, they were hearing responses like, this is not one person's job. No one on earth can do this job and do all of these things well. This is crazy. And then when they revealed to them that this was kind of the responsibilities of a Catholic school principal, the comments were like, well, you're setting them up to fail. And so that kind of goes with Father McGuire's, we have to look at what practices we can share, what we can consolidate, how we can work smarter, not harder. I have in my diocese, I have one school that is separate from a parish, but all of the other schools are parish-owned schools. My Divine Providence Academy is a parish-owned school, even though I have multiple campuses. And so one of the things that we do is say, okay, one person cannot do this job. It's crazy. You will burn out. So what do we do? And so when I built my team at Divine Providence Academy, not only because I couldn't physically be in multiple places at one time, I also knew that my leadership strengths didn't necessarily fit all of those 7 areas. I knew that I was really good at some of them and not so good at others because I wasn't trained in marketing. I wasn't trained in enrollment. My public school background really made me strong in data-driven instruction. And I think, I understood how to run a school, but some of those other pieces were missing. And I had been doing blended learning since about 2007. So at Divine Providence Academy, we currently have about 120 students, and that's spread out between the 2 campuses. And I still can't do the entire job by myself. So I have put together a leadership team. All of us are teachers within our school, but we are also kind of taking point for a lot of those leadership responsibilities, the tasks that need to be done. We refer to ourselves as a 3-legged stool. Why do stools have 3 legs? So they don't fall down, right? I mean, they're more stable as a tripod with the 3 legs versus 1 leg with just a seat, right? So we have our weekly leadership team meetings, and we're talking about our responsibilities and doing some of those great things. Our diocese, has hired an enrollment and marketing director for the diocese that we have access to whenever we meet them. So we're not expected to be the experts. So Tim, he's our technology person, but he's also kind of been our contact with our enrollment and marketing person as well, and kind of talking about grassroots efforts at our building and how does that trickle down. But it's so great having an expert to go to say, we don't know marketing, what should we be doing? I have a little video that I want to share with you. Has anybody heard of the first follower? Okay, I love it. It's great. And I think it shows I'm kind of the lone nut. I think your superintendent and your assistant superintendents are kind of lone nuts. And I think what they're really hoping to find today is maybe some first followers.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore. It's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate the followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute, you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is overglorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
So Kendra was definitely our lone nut. We didn't have a strong follower who then embraced us and made us a part of the team. Like I said, we were so lost for so long, and finally having somebody come in who was willing to dance like that, and she does. She really does. But we all joined in happily. We all joined in happily because we finally had somebody that we could work with and not necessarily work for. And I think that made a really big difference.
So how many of you are principals? Okay, the best advice that I can give you is you're gonna go back to your building and you're gonna be that lone nut. You need to identify who your first follower or first followers are going to be. And you need to take them under your wing, and you need to be a team together. And you need to brainstorm and share ideas and plan and do all of those things, because we all know as principals, our jobs are very lonely. And so one of the first things that I do with the schools that I work for is I say, let's identify your team and let's grow your team and let's invest in your team. one of the other things that I think is important when you're looking at adopting blended learning is the principal cannot be the only champion of the cause. And there are many facets to blended learning because you have your technology side of things. And I've heard a few people today say, oh, technology is not where I'm at. That's totally fine. You don't have to be a technology expert to be a blended learning school. You just need to recognize then, I need to find some people on my team who just naturally are good at this. The kind of the pattern that we're seeing in the schools that we're working with is, and this is, I don't mean this in a negative way at all, but your younger teachers seem to more naturally fall into that role of the blended learning coordinator because that's kind of where the technology emphasis is. They're great at accommodate them. They've grown up with it. And so it's just a part of who they are. So in a lot of our schools, my first, second, third year teachers are the ones who are taking on kind of that blended learning coordinator role because that's so tech heavy. And then where the wiser, more experienced teachers come in is more of the instruction and assessment coordinator pieces. Because I do think it's very important, and we'll talk about this when we get into being data driven. And I know Father McGuire said this morning too, is those assessments that should be done 3 times a year. And then, the big question is then what do we do with the results? How do we inform our practice? And that's where I think our more experienced and our wiser teachers come into play because they've seen it. They have experienced so many students in their time, and they have a lot of great resources and ideas. And one thing that we fail to do, whether we're in the public school, the charter school, or the private school, is collaborate. We kind of go into our classrooms, our 4 walls, and we isolate ourselves. And it's a travesty because there's so much experience and wisdom that gets lost because we're isolated in our classrooms. And so building in someone who can serve as that instruction and assessment coordinator and really be a mentor to the entire staff. So you kind of have your technology expert who's going to get to know the software and how it works and your machines and your bandwidth and kind of all of that. And then you have someone else on your team who is going to handle a lot of that instruction and assessment and best practice types of things.
And really quick, we were kind of the black sheep in our diocese for a while, even though our superintendent gave us this opportunity. We were different than everybody else. We didn't have our whole diocese on board. And so we were the lone wolf. And we got a lot of looks, and we got a lot of what do you guys think you're doing from other teachers, and probably even a lot of principals too. But it's really exciting when we get together with our diocese now to see people maybe joining our wolf pack, you might say. They're coming to us and we're maybe teaching a class on something, a whole diocesan thing, and they're pulling things from us, and we're starting to feel more part of the group because people are catching on to what we're doing and how great it is. And so that's really exciting. Like, you might be a lone wolf in some areas, but it will eventually catch on.
All right, so step number 1, develop that leadership team. You can't do it alone. Another important piece is kind of identifying that school culture. Who are you? What do you want to be? And maybe what do you want to move away from? Yes, we are all Catholic schools, but every school that I have visited has its own unique identity, and that should be celebrated. I loved it when Father McGuire said this morning, there are some things that all of their schools do the same, but they also recognize that each school has its own needs. It has its own customer base. Is going to start the after-school program. Thing for that school to do. Well, that probably doesn't have either the equipment or the knowledge base or even an interest from students for coding. So why would they do that? That's okay. So we really encourage schools to go through this intentional school culture. And even if you think you have a great school culture, it's still worth the exercise to go through and evaluate. We look at ours on an annual basis. We kind of went through and we developed ourselves, and then we review it every year and say, are we on track? Do we need to change anything? Has our customer base changed? Are we still serving the same purpose? And I'll show you an example of ours here in just a second. But getting the staff buy-in for that is so important, because they're your front lines. And as you're trying to identify who you are as a school, you want to make sure that that is happening in the classroom as well. Fostering effective and efficient routines, procedures, and practices. So one of the things with the school that I was working with is they felt that they were very orderly, was one of the things that they really wanted to celebrate and emphasize, because that was a value in their community, that Catholic schools are very structured and orderly. And I was there for the day, and I kind of look at, okay, you told me what you want, then I'm going to kind of be the outsider looking in and seeing what I recognize. Their cafeteria was a nightmare. It was crazy. There was no order at all. Kids were running around. They had a fight break out. And so I casually said to the principal, I said, I get that orderly is something that you value and you want to do. I think you need to spend some time as a staff developing some routines and procedures for how you're going to run your cafeteria. Because the teachers would drop the kids off and go into the teacher's lounge, and they had, aides kind of monitoring lunch. Well, the aides didn't know what the school culture was or what was expected. So they were just kind of letting the kids go crazy. So, taking the time to identify who you are, and then really making sure that every single thing that you do as a school aligns back to that. And if it doesn't, you need to tweak it. You need to fix it so that it does. So I talked about kind of that faculty vision setting. You need to adopt a framework. You need to implement some norms. How are we going to do business on a daily basis? What are our expectations for our students? What are our expectations for our staff? One of the things that I look for in schools who have strong school cultures is the idea that the artifacts, even like the pictures and the posters and the quotes in the room, support the vision. A great example that I love is there's a school that I work with, and you walk in, and the first thing you see, you've got the picture of the Pope on one side, and then there's this poster of this cat that's like barely hanging on to a branch. Some of you might have seen it, and the bottom says "Hang in there." And the message that is sending as kids are coming through the door is, this is going to be a really bad thing for you, but just hang on and you'll get through it. You'll survive. Don't give up. And I get the don't give up part, but the message that they're sending is, this is going to be bad and you're not going to like it, but just hang in there. So some of those things to make sure that everything in the school supports the mission and vision. And the research that is coming out is saying, out of that list of 7 things, there are 2 that are like your superstar areas to focus on. If you, anything else, these are the 2 things that you should do. Anybody have an idea what they are? It is 2 and 3. Excellent. So, we're here to talk about blended learning. Blended learning is part of a great school, but it does not make your school. We had a lot of technology, and we said we were a blended learning school, and you're going to see where we started as far as our standardized testing and what our scores were. And you're going to see we were not a great school, but we were missing school culture. We did not have a unified school culture, and we were doing nothing with data.
We were better than the public schools in the area. Our students would still come, teachers would say, your students have our best test scores. Your students are doing fantastic. We always know the students that come from St. Joseph or St. Catherine or St. Michael. They knew that. They were saying, you guys are top of the line, but you'll see our scores and they're not that great. So
Ignorance was bliss at that point.
Right. We're all thinking, oh, we're doing great. But now that we look back, what a disservice. Even though we were doing better in the area, it doesn't mean we were doing the best that we could.
All right, so if you go back and you take anything back today, spend some time on school culture with your staff. This is what we've developed as our framework. And we have embraced this. Our students can explain these things to you and what they mean. Even my adorable little kindergartners can tell you what it means to respect, seek, strive, serve, and love. So we kind of break it down because we have a mission and a vision, and that shows up on our emails, it shows up on our letterhead, we talk about it at staff meetings. We use that as a basis to inform our decisions. What field trips are we going to go on? Well, if we're going to spend money on a field trip, we better make sure that it's helping us achieve our mission and our vision. And if it's not, it was a great idea, but probably not the best use of our resources. So we're very intentional about everything that we do at our school. So the next big one, kind of the superstar, data-driven instruction. Blended learning is a great tool to help you achieve this because it really takes a lot of energy and effort off the teacher because the computer can grade and assess and do some things for the teacher that they don't have time to do every day. But it's so important. And I really, really, really want to emphasize differentiation. When we started out, our technology invested a lot of money in it, but not a lot of practical applications with it. And the software that we purchased was terrible. And a lot of times it wouldn't even load on our computers. So we recognized that even with 3 grades in the classroom, we had to differentiate. I could not expect the same outcomes from a 3rd grader or a kindergartner that I could from their classmate sitting next to them that was a 2nd grader or a 5th grader. So looking at differentiation and saying every child deserves a special education is kind of the philosophy that we use. I think it's a great analogy is when you go into the doctor's office for your physical and, typical practices, they're gonna, take your height and your weight and they're gonna draw some blood. Well, I know I would want my doctor prescribing medication and a treatment plan based on my blood work and my height and my weight, not, the person that was in the office before me. But in education, we have gotten to the place where we kind of think one size fits all, right? And it doesn't matter who our students are necessarily as individuals because 3rd graders need to know this. And they all are going to learn it on the same day at the same time. But yet when we look at child development, we realize that kids don't learn to walk and talk on the same day at the same time in their development. So we've missed a great opportunity in education. And when we talk about kind of that curve, and what did you refer to that point in your product where the inflection point? We've missed a great opportunity there. And I think differentiation is the place that we need to go. We need to recognize that all kids can be successful, not just say it, but believe it. And we need to adapt our practices as the teacher to meet their needs. I know that I went into education not to be a principal, not to have to fill out tons of reports and lots of paperwork and do teacher evaluations. I went into education because I wanted to make the difference in the life of a child. And the best way for me to do that is to help all kids see themselves as successful learners. And in order to do that, I have to differentiate in my classroom because I need to recognize that Johnny and Susie are not going to learn to long divide on the same day at the same time.
And you really get to know your students more that way too. You can look back and say, you can look out and say, I know this person's here in math, I know this person's here in reading. You really know where your students are and what your students' strengths are and what your students need to work on, and giving them opportunities to spend more time in the areas that they need and move on from the areas that they don't need is really important because you're filling in a lot of gaps that traditionally would have just been moved along.
We're in the middle of an assessment cycle right now. We use MAPS. That works for us. A lot of the local public schools use that. Our entire diocese uses that. So for us, it's a great standard for us to compare how we're doing against other schools in our area. And we also know it well enough that that we can get the information that we need. But whether it's STAR, or I have some schools that are using the Terra Nova and they're under a contract and they can't get out of that contract for a while. It doesn't matter what you're using as long as you're using some sort of standardized tool that you can measure student growth with. I want to show you, so like I said, right now we're in the middle of a testing cycle. So this morning I was super excited because as I was sitting on my Chromebook, I had teachers back in Michigan that are assessing their students and they're typing in their scores on our data wall. And so we color code every single student that we have in our schools. And blue means that that student is working at least one full grade level above where we would expect them to be. Green is they're working right within the grade level that we would expect them to be at. Yellow is maybe, well, it's below grade level, but not a full grade below. And red, those are our kids that we really get concerned about. And I picked this snapshot because it had all the colors in it. So you can kind of see, and we track our kids. So it's 3 times a year. So you'll see, oops, sorry about that. Maybe this one doesn't have a pointer. Oh, great. Can you drive me? Can you go? Just put me back. So the first column that you'll see were where the kids tested in the spring of last year. We summer slide, and we don't assume that our students are going to come back in September to us, how they left us at the end of May. So we look at that summer slide and what their growth is and kind of the trajectory of where they are. The last column is the growth. So we're kind of concerned with 2 things. We're concerned of where they are in comparison to their peers as far as, you know, the curriculum and their grade level expectations. But we're more concerned with our students' growth. And so we look at even our blue kids who are working a full year, at least a full year above where we would expect them to be. And we expect to see their growth trajectory just as high as we do our kids that are in the red area. If our kids, if all of our kids aren't making gains, we're not doing our job. And for me, as a teacher, that's so refreshing to be able to look at it that way, because I know that when I started out in the classroom, I did 1 lesson for 30 students, and I expected them all to learn it. And then the next day I would do another lesson. And I didn't have the mindset that I needed to slow down for some students, speed up for some students, and really look at that. So we build a data wall every year for our students, and we track it. MAPS does provide some great reports for you, but we have found that actually the process of having teachers have to type in and color code their students really helps them identify where their kids are at. And it helps them see some surprises, because we all have teacher gut, right? Where we kind of look at a kid and we know what we expect, but this just helps them track it a little bit. Andrew, is there anything that you want to add about this?
I want to tell a little story just as we were talking about that. I went to, occasionally we'll go to things in our intermediate area school districts. The counties, they'll have things with the public schools, and we'll attend them as well. And I was sitting in a meeting, and again, black sheep, lone wolf, in a sea of other people, explaining what we do. And I had a teacher from a public school literally yell at me, "No, you teach to the middle. Those older, the kids ahead, they got it, you know, and the ones below, there's nothing you can do. You teach to the middle. That's what you do." And it's one thing to say, this is what I have to do. These are my expectations in a school. I know it's not great, but I'm doing the best I can with what I have because I don't have options in my public school. But it's another to completely dismiss large parts of your class because they're working ahead, so they don't need me. They don't need anything from me, they're fine. Or the ones that are lower, I don't understand how that teacher could be okay with saying, I'm just gonna worry about these couple of kids in the middle because that's all that really matters. I was shocked. And so that story just stood out to me. And I'm sure most of you out there would feel the same way, that that's not an okay story. Sometimes there's not much we can do about it, but it's not okay to say, you're doing the wrong thing trying to help all the kids in your room.
I think what we'll do is we've been at it for a little over an hour. I think we should take a break. Some of you are looking a little sleepy, and I apologize if that's us that's making you sleepy, or it might just be that hour after lunchtime that everybody needs to stretch. So let's do a 10-minute break, kind of get up, walk around, use the restroom, grab some refreshments. We talked about the two biggies, school culture and being data-driven, and then we'll get into kind of some of the other awesome things that help you achieve the data-driven school culture. So we'll come back at like 27-ish. So yeah, 2:27.
And if you're paid,
Yeah. They were
are you leaving?
the first one.
You're leaving now? Yeah. No, I was gonna say, if you have time I could probably try to do it. Not that it was my job, but I tried to my I'm just saying that's where my contact is. It's not really get out of the road, actually, because I was thinking that it was my reflection. And then I started thinking, I was like, yeah. 7 years ago with it. So I should wait. I should wait. I'm not there. Whatever. Yeah.
It works good.
And less about entering all that data. And you know what, to be honest, I don't even mind entering all the data for them. And then I can see it. Well, and then I can see it. But beautiful. So that's the story.
It's almost like, but you know, the weird thing was, it's like perfect, right? It's like, I really choose that. Why did they do?
Thank you for your support and your money and your.
It's amazing. Yeah.
But it's rough.
Yeah.
And the worst
Well,
too is
they, yeah.
you know, like, you don't have the money, figure it out. I mean, that's some of the for a guy who's like, I don't have any kids there. I don't even have any students there, and I'm supposed to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. But some of them still say that.
Yeah, so anyway. So are you finding that how you do, or is it somebody you need some help? This is a resource.
I've had a good mix of both. Some principals have just some dioceses, some have invited, you know, their,
And do you find them receptive, or that's the least desirable? Is that where the fire is under? Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
and
that's
I'm gonna build a relationship.
Yeah.
So. I tried.
And that's the same.
I'm not.
We tried that. We have
Oh, thanks, Reed.
Because they don't have skin in the game. Somebody don't have skin in the game. They don't get to this. I would rather hire 5 people, 5 people. No, it doesn't, but a parent could be.
Well, thank you.
Go around door to door, but- So here's your, right, now, what I don't have here is the third piece of data. There's public schools. Public schools right here, but you'll see what we do compared to our other public school, our other parish schools. We're 66% compared to 31. But 12, so we only have, and we've got some lowest. Now, you notice this is the reading. We only just started that. The difference is big, the vast difference. And if you break that down to your school, which is almost, you have 75% of the start, 75 of being in those schools, 75 start school. Yeah, but like, but I think we've been doing this for 2 years. 75% of the national percent, 25 points above the national average. 25 points above the national average. So the fact that she's maintained that, and this is extraordinary, is that they started just at the national average, started to read, and really got about 4 points, and that's only 4 weeks of practice. Really, right now. Now remember, this is according to our goal. This is our
30 to 50.
That's
You're making me feel
our
guilty.
goal is 10% above.
I normally do light lunch because I was at lunch
16.
at school, so I normally do breakfast, light lunch.
So we're probably more than 80% than actually doing this. You want, when I compare the public school data, that's why I didn't put the public school data in there. Because once you put the public school data, then all of us look so green.
I don't eat as much as you guys.
It just.
Yeah, because Jerry thinks I eat 24 hours a day. Like even in my study, Tim could throw it down. Tim's like the starter. Oh, yeah?
Like 700.
Is it 700?
Just like
So
a
we
bunch of
found,
schools.
I think that's our.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's
It's
right.
also,
We cannot compare ourselves to the people but before we come to the media, gas. We want to compare ourselves to the so now we can compare ourselves to our neighbors. We can't utter our folks was very good. Yeah, no, both parts are a lot of things.
You might have bring your wife. I don't know about Teddy.
But yeah, I just had to push like 30, but I have to.
That's what I'm saying, we're using that, we get a direct comparison. That's why we chose it. Big reason we chose it.
Yeah.
One time he was up at Boston.
The biggest reason we chose one of the biggest.
The nice thing is they don't like it.
I think one time we were
You
at
go to save it, you
School of Intelligence.
Oh, they did? Yeah. Yeah. Well, see,
We pull our data, and because they're required to publicly show their data, we have access to.
that's nice.
We look at it, we just are printing out, it's embarrassing. So we couldn't do that with last time. That was the sinker for us.
That is a good reason too.
And they are far taking it because when they sound like they're so aggressive in the market,
Yeah.
they are putting more resources to that.
Yeah.
And they're selling it, but it's
I was,
huge.
I know you have the formative part, and that would be the part I would have to concede. I would concede that to the start.
But the last one is
But see,
the last one is the major.
We're in-
The lockout is just showing the state over there.
we're in Loma Vista, which is southwest side of Omaha. We started mapping last year, they started map this year, so I'm just dying to get.
So when you take a part of the data, like we have
Yeah.
our statistics, data, all our schools.
My last
biases, you start, right? And we sold it, we said we'll give it to you for free.
Yeah.
Number two, so homeschool. So this year, they got their own data, plus the homeschool data, and we got their data.
They do.
Oh, that's nice.
So we're showing our data against their data, and we're like 10 points above them.
Yeah.
No matter what the goal is. In math, in English and John's, we're about the same. Wouldn't surprise me because we haven't done much in that. We're just doing it now this year. So this year, we're gonna move ahead of them, but then that's gonna put pressure on them to join.
Yeah.
That's all it is. And of course, we're killing the public schools. And where we're killing public schools in Peru is in the lowest income neighborhoods. I mean, we're killing them at 20, 30 points. It's just scandalous what they're doing to the public schools.
All right, I know that it's afternoon and everybody just wants to chit chat. So I will try to go through the rest of this relatively quickly so that we have time for question and answers and dialogue. But I want to make sure that I fulfill what I came here to do. Yeah, right.
I told her to start dancing and you would all join in.
Yeah. So we kind of shared with you some of the experiences of Divine Providence Academy and how that change was not managed in the best way. And that's where principals, you come in knowing your staff, knowing your parents, knowing your students, knowing your board members, and setting a pace that's appropriate for your school. I say we, but I can also caveat that I was not the we at that time. They did it way too fast. And those communities were not ready for that kind of drastic change. Did we get there eventually? Yeah. I mean, we had this year a 20% growth. So that's exciting for us, especially because we're very small and we don't have a lot of population to pull from. So that's a big deal. But it took us time. And had I been part of this sooner, we would have begged for some more time. I believe.
We didn't have opportunities like this either. We had nobody who came to us and shared with us a process that could work. And so that's really a benefit that you have Father and Kendra that are able to share those things, because we felt very lost.
You know, I started out with blended learning and using this model in 2007, and I refer to it oftentimes as the bleeding edge. I didn't even feel like I was on the cutting edge. I was bleeding because I had read about all this stuff in books and it sounded awesome. And I thought, wow, it sounds great, let's try to put it into practice. And it was really kind of pushing the envelope even in the public sector at that point. So I just want to reference, you of change in your buildings, or as supporting those leaders, you need to have the dialogue about what is an appropriate speed to be driving that bus. And it's different for every single school. And I'm going to share with you some results in a little bit of some different schools that I've worked with that have adopted this process, and kind of the rates of change that they've adopted, and how that's impacted their results. But you really have to be mindful of the people that you're working with and what they can handle. And it has to be, we kind of call it that just right point in learning with our students, where they're being pushed and they're being challenged, but they're not frustrated and they're not giving up, and they're not, I always say, I don't ever want to see a child curled up in the fetal position sucking their thumb because they are so overwhelmed and stressed. So we call it the just right learning, where they're challenged and they're being pushed to grow, but they're not bored and it's not too slow. So what that just right learning level looks like for every student is different, and what that just right change management looks like in every building is different. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. So if you want to get like the biggest bang for your buck, you start with school culture and you adopt some way of being data driven. We adopted the MAPS testing before we adopted all of the other software to help us with the blended learning process. I adopted it 5 years ago. We couldn't afford anything that was out there. We couldn't even afford Alex. So we adopted differentiation, and I have to say I'm amazed that my teachers have stayed, because they probably, if I were them, I would have bailed after the first year, because the pressure and the expectations that were being put on them to differentiate for all the students in their classroom without any tools or resources or supports to do so, I would have said, see ya. So one of the things that I think is really important with this process, whether it's in year 1 or year 2, is this instructional coaching piece. And it becomes where you want the staff to feel that you are working with them and you're in the trenches and you're encouraging and you're supporting. And it's okay if you don't have all the answers, because this is new and cutting edge. So no one, has to be ashamed for saying, I don't know, but I'm going to be there with you and we're going to walk this together and we're going to talk through it and we're going to take on these challenges. I said to my staff when I came on, I said, this is probably going to be really ugly, but we're in it and we're in it together. And I need you to trust me that I will support you through this process. And initially we said, no one is going to lose their job because this gets messy. But what we want to see is that everybody's making an effort to join the movement and make this happen. And that was a big deal. And I felt that the best way for my teachers to feel supported was for me to be visible and be in their classrooms as much as possible. Not as a, I'm in there taking notes and evaluating what they're saying, what they're doing, but just that I was there supporting and cheering them on. So the instructional coaching, we feel we're getting way better results by way more frequent, brief classroom observations. I remember when I was a classroom teacher and I knew that my principal was coming in to observe me, I would put a lot of time into planning that one lesson, because I knew, man, I had 45 minutes to make it spectacular. So I kind of went back to kind of the college training that I had and my anticipatory set and, laid it all out, and it was going to be awesome. And I'd like to say anybody can fake it for 45 minutes, right? And so I felt that the best way for me to support my teachers was to be in and out, not scheduled, and just to be popping into their classrooms for 5, 10, 15. Sometimes I get sucked in because I love what they're doing. And I realize I've got to go up in here, for a half hour. But, and the more that I did that, the less threatened they felt by me being in their room. And now, it's to the point where I try to be in the rooms. I come in and out as much as possible. And it's really kind of fun to walk in the rooms and get the kids all, fired up and then leave.
And she works with the students too, though. She won't just come in because students are working on all different kinds of things. She'll bend down and she'll look at what they're writing and she'll work with them. So I think it's a really beneficial thing for the students too. They're able to explain what they're doing, even though they're working independently and on their own. They know what their goal is, they're explaining it, you're guiding them as well. She's part of the process, which is really great. And it's good because our kids are really used to it. We have a lot of people that come to visit us. And, you know, just like we were visiting schools in the beginning, people out there are trying to figure it out. A lot of the schools that you work with come to us. And our kids are so used to people just standing on the wall and observing what they're doing and asking them questions. And they're so good at explaining what they're doing because they're really taking ownership about their own learning. And so it's really fun when Kendra just comes in and she's not just watching the kids and she's not just watching us, but she's partaking in the classroom activity and it has a really nice flow to it.
I love it. We had some folks from the University of Notre Dame come to our school, and I was encouraged people to talk to the students, ask them questions. I said, they're well versed in the fact that they're supposed to ignore you because they need to carry on with what they need to do in the classroom because we have so many visitors in and out. It's really, we don't want it to be a disruption. I said, but they're also trained that if you ask them a question, they will answer. And I tell our students to be very honest. But the best way to know is to ask the kids because they'll give you the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we had a student, I think it was one of our first graders at the time, and one of the gentlemen from Notre Dame stopped and asked what that child was working on, and the child kind of looks at him and says, I can't be bothered right now, I'm working on my goal and I'm really close to making it, and went right back to work. And so, you know, that resonated with that gentleman so much, but you know, I kind of cringed when I heard that, a little rude, but they were just so excited that that child, that little first grader, recognized that they had goals and they were working towards goals, and they were so excited that they were going to make that goal that learning was the priority for that moment. And that was awesome. So yeah, after I got over the initial shock of, we need to talk about manners, that wasn't very respectful, that goes against our core values, to kind of accept the fact that that child was just being very honest and was very motivated at that point in time because they were seeing that light and so close to reaching that next level that they didn't want to be interrupted with some guy asking them questions about what they liked about school. Go back. So after I try to touch base with each teacher. Now, keep in mind, I'm a small school. I have a staff of about 10. And I try to meet with them on a regular basis. So we meet as a whole staff twice a month. And then we meet in our building teams or individually in small groups twice a month. And that's where we are having those conversations about what I saw in the classroom, what was working. I asked teachers if I saw something that was working really well. I'll kind of put my teachers on the spot and say, will you share with the group what you did? And that's kind of a way to acknowledge. But we've created an atmosphere too where it's okay to have challenges and something not go well, and that we bring it to the team and say, oh, you know, look at Johnny, he's still red. I'm really struggling. This is what I've tried. I don't know what else to do. And that's where we say we're all in this together and we want our entire school to be successful. It's not just, you know, oh, Johnny's your student, he's your problem this year. I moved him on. And so we all together is better. And so taking the expertise of everybody and really talking through that about what strategies can we use, or, you know, what I have been seeing this year that's super exciting is I have teachers that on their planning and their prep time, they're offering to go into other teachers' classrooms to help some of those struggling kids. And that to me is a victory, because that means we've really arrived to the fact that these are all of our students. And as a school, it is our responsibility to make sure all of our students are successful. And in the public school, you never see that happen because they're not contractually obligated to go into a classroom and help another student. So that kind of, what kind of leads into that is that professional learning communities and the professional development. So being very intentional, it's great to have speakers in. And I don't know about you as principals, but I feel like I get 5 to 10 emails a day of some organization or somebody wanting to come in and do professional development for my staff. I need to be very intentional. And so when we started out, our math scores, from my perspective, were terrible. And I said, all of our efforts and all of our professional development, because we don't have a lot of money, so we have to make every penny count, was focused on improving our math scores. And we really put all of our eggs. And now math actually surpassed reading the last couple of years. So now we're kind of back on the reading trajectory, saying everything that we do, we have to go back to literacy. And so that's awesome that I have one of the people on my instructional leadership team who's getting her master's. She's very close into being a reading specialist. So she's done a lot of our PD in-house for us, because I figured she's going to the university, she's getting the best practice that's out there, and then having her share at staff meetings so that we can learn those practices from her. So those professional learning communities where we share, we celebrate, we get frustrated together, and really depend on one another for those successes and those challenges. One of the things that we've instituted this year is the Positive Pete. I should say Positive Tim, because he's the only guy on our staff, but the Positive Pete or the Positive Patty Award. And so every staff meeting, we're passing kind of the torch of who do we want to recognize for taking kind of that problem-solving attitude and remaining positive in some struggles. We've taken on, in our growth, which is awesome, the 20% increase. We've taken on some kids, like Father said, they're not necessarily incoming preschoolers or kindergartners. They're kids that are leaving schools for reasons. And they're coming to us because parents are recognizing that because we're addressing every individual student, we might be able to help their child be successful. But as we're kind of incorporating our new students into our school culture, there's always challenges that come with that. And so one of the things that we celebrate when we do meet as a professional learning community is who has been kind of a positive Patty or a positive Pete when it comes to problem solving. In working with some of these challenges, because it's really easy to just get frustrated and want to give up. And so trying to kind of stay the course. So building in those opportunities for internal dialogue. You're going to find that your first followers or your early adopters, you're going to have staff where you're going to have some that you're going to have to say, slow down. They're going to love this and they're going to take it on like crazy. But you're going to, at the same time, your job is going to be to say, let's not bite off more than we can chew. How do we eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Let's be intentional about this, because they're going to love it and they're going to get it and they're going to go full speed. And so you need to continue to support them while you're kind of pulling some of the other ones along. And I think it's really important to set up structured times with them and with their peers, that if you have some of those early adopters that you've recognized in your observations, that you're pulling them together and letting them share, because they're going to want to talk about it. And sometimes when they talk about it, it can overwhelm some of the people that are struggling or not as quick to jump on board. So you want to make sure that you're setting an environment where those early adopters can play off of each other, and not, while encouraging some of the slower ones, but not overwhelming them. Important for that. Andrea was an early adopter from the get-go before I even came on board, and she was very fortunate that there was another teacher in her building that also had embraced the philosophy as an early adopter. But I can only imagine if she was the only teacher in that building and she was trying to make the best of a difficult situation and kind of move forward and figure out, how can we do this? And this is going to be great for kids, and this isn't a threat, this is an opportunity. Had she not had that, I think it would have been really easy to give up. And you want to encourage that momentum and that enthusiasm. Okay, so talking a little bit about our enrollment and marketing and some of the things that we've done that have been successful for us. So we kind of look at, why do we need to market and why do we need to increase our enrollment? Well, we need to be sustainable when it comes to our finances. I shared with you that one of the schools was taking 80% of the Sunday collection on a weekly basis. That was not healthy. That was not healthy for the parish, and that was not healthy for the school. And that our tuition was the cost to educate was about $12,000. And families in one of my campuses, families were paying no tuition. It was just good faith that they were going to put money in the collection plate on Sunday. So that needed to change as well. So we've got our costs down We're a school of 120, I have a staff of 10, and that includes my custodian. And our cost to educate is about $4,700. So we're pretty excited that we've taken the $12,000 and got it down to $4,700. Tuition is $2,950. So they think they're paying under $3,000. So for lack of, we'll just say it's $3,000. And then the parishes are supporting the other percent. One of the parishes that's helping put money in is giving 30% of their Sunday collection. And another parish that is supporting is giving 32% of their Sunday collection. So from our perspective, getting it down from 80 to 32 or 35 is great, but it's still not okay because we are very small parishes. We're in rural communities. We need to ramp up, get some money in other ways. And so we're working on that. It was really important for us to identify and communicate our brand, which is WINGS, world knowledge, individualized education, nurturing family environment, God-centered with supportive technology. That's where that WINGS comes from. That's kind of, we're known as the WINGS schools, in like the Drexel schools in our diocese. And NCA did the Momentum magazine a couple years ago, did an article on us, and they referred to us as the WINGS model or the WINGS school. So that's kind of how we're known. So that's our brand, and we've kind of embraced that. And we're using that as part of our marketing strategy. You know, a lot of this comes out of the research from Notre Dame too, where we're saying, we're a small school. I don't have a marketing specific person that's their job, or I don't have an enrollment coordinator where that's their job. It's me and my staff to do that. So tell us where we can get the best bang for our buck. Where should we be focusing our energy and efforts? And it wasn't, you need to advertise on a billboard. For us, it was, you need to start communicating to the parish families that aren't sending their students to your schools the great things that you're doing. And that hadn't been happening. And so kind of looking at how we can utilize that, as well as, kind of putting out there the blended learning stuff. That's kind of like that sparkly, shiny carrot that kind of gets them in the door because that's exciting in our geographical area, and they like that. But we're so much more than that, but that's kind of the thing that we can dangle out there and say we're a blended learning school. And that really has helped get some PR blitz. In fact, this year we've actually pulled from some other Catholic schools, not that we want their enrollment to go down, but the fact that it is very difficult to get a family to cross over once they're planted. And that was because of the blended learning. Parents recognized that was going to be a great opportunity for their kids. Our main focus has been birth to preschool. And so we've really pushed with families coming in for baptisms, doing some strategies. One of the schools is starting a record of births, and they're sending birthday cards every year. Some of them have incorporated, $500 certificate off your first year of school. And families hold on to that. They're turning it in and getting, a break in tuition when they come as kindergartners. But that has been tremendously helpful for us. We actually have a waiting list for our preschools this year. We're full. We have no other space to put them, and we're finding that our retention rate from our preschool into kindergarten is carrying over very strongly. So we're excited about that 120% because we think if we can keep filling those kids early and we get them in the door, we're going to keep them.
And preschool is new to one of the buildings. I was just going to say preschool is new to one of our buildings, and it's been a great provider of students to the older grades. We didn't have that in one of our buildings, and it was so successful in one of the other buildings. We decided to move over, and it was great because now that preschool as well is full and at max capacity. So it's really great to see all these new families coming in every year just from preschool.
And for us in these small areas, a super exciting thing for us is we're even getting non-Catholic families who don't necessarily feel obligated because they want the Catholic education, but they value what we're doing enough and they're excited about, you know, the spiritual part of it, but they're not being deterred because we're a Catholic school. They're seeing us and saying, we want to be part of that. That's great. Schools used to be known as is those neighborhood schools that it didn't matter. We wanted our kids to go there because they were the best. So we're starting to see that transition a little bit as well. Father McGuire talked about this morning, those parent ambassadors. Word of mouth is the best form of advertisement. So you get those first followers, you gotta find those parents who are gonna embrace the change and get super excited about what you're doing. And you get the grandparents in, because let's face it, the grandparents tend to be the ones that have the money and might be able to help with some of the tuition and things like that. So you get the grandparents in and you get the parents, and word of mouth. You know, we've gained quite a few students from the ladies coming together to play euchre and to play bingo on Tuesday afternoons, and it's a bunch of grandmas that come in the church basement and they play, but they are talking about the experiences that their grandchildren are having at our school, and they tell the other grandmas, and the grandmas go and they call up their son or their daughter and say, did you know what's going on at that school? Or, you know, how come we haven't heard about that before? Did you think about that for Susie? So that's been huge for us, that parent ambassadors, and we've actually held sessions where we've given some cards, some talking points for our parents, so that they know, like when they're like, well, what do we say? Because even the parents are like, we're kind of this crazy different school, we don't really know what to say. So we've given them some talking points, and we've actually rehearsed, and what can you say about our school when you're out and about? And I think that those payoffs are coming as well. All right, so we talked a lot about this. This is kind of getting into the blended learning part. For us, we recognize that blended learning is all of these things. It's a philosophy, but this is what it allows us to do. It adapts, it's data rich, self-paced, differentiated. Those are kind of the buzzwords. Gamified. I had a second grader who swore to his mom that he did not do math in second grade. They never did math all day long, no math. So when the mom comes in for parent conference, you know, student conferences, she says, you know, I know you're doing math, but I just can't figure this out because, you know, he's telling me that you're not doing math at all. And the teacher kind of looked and said, we do math for an hour and a half every day. And so as they kind of got into the conversation, the student had this perception that math was open up your textbooks and you're going to work through these math problems. Not that it was, you know, playing games on the computer and doing calendar all together and doing project-based learning and meeting with the teacher one-on-one. So there was a disconnect between what that child thought math class should be like and what it actually was. And come to find out that student was actually working above grade level. So they were even progressing through the math curriculum much quicker than some of their peers. So that's kind of a cool thing, because Father McGuire was saying, yes, learning can be tough, but it has to be fun. The kids have to enjoy and feel good about what they're doing. And the blended learning and finding the right software for your students allows that to happen. So for us, when we say we're a blended learning school, and it doesn't look the same in all of our classrooms necessarily, there's varied pathways for learning. There's varied places where learning can happen. There's varied speeds at which learning can happen, and varied time of day. And depending on the teacher and the curriculum, all those things come into play in our classrooms. So if you're saying, okay, I'm not going to worry about the other 6 things, but I'm going to look at number 7 and I want to be a blended learning school, what do I need to do to make that happen? And Father McGuire touched on this, so I'm just going to emphasize. I said, you know, I really didn't need a percent this afternoon because he said pretty much everything that needed to be said this morning. But I think there's sisters in the back talked about this too, what your building capacity is, as far as your bandwidth, your infrastructure. What are you wired for? And sometimes that means having an expert come in from the outside and look at your systems and help inform what's going on. To know what you can work with. We actually weren't wired very well to be a blended learning school, so we had to kind of get creative about how we were able to pull that off. And we ended up being able to partner with our intermediate school district, and they paid to get us wired for the internet, because at that point there was no internet at our school. So yeah, right? In that little red school that I showed up there. So we were able to work with them, and they got us hooked up. And so it's really important to know what you're working with and what you can afford to do before you start to buy devices, because you don't want to look at content providers or devices until you know what you can sustain, because a lot of the providers out there might require things that you're not equipped for. When we took this on, and with a lot of the new content providers that are coming out, and some of the ones that are quickly rising to the top as being, good ones, we found that a lot of the ones that we had selected would not work on an Apple device. So we chose to move away from Apple, and that's when we started with the Droid, or now we're moving to all of the Chromebooks, because it was very cost effective for us, and the software that we had identified that was going to best meet our needs. And that's not the same for every school either. It's really important to do your work and kind of vet and demo some things and find out what's going to work best for your needs. But what we had identified that we wanted to use wasn't going to work on Apple, so we decided to go the other way. I always recommend, as schools are saying, what do I need for devices? What do you, obviously one-to-one would be ideal, and that would be fabulous, but not every school is financially able to do that, or they don't have the donors to do that. So we look at ideally having a 1 to 3, because if you have one device for every 3 students, you can pull off station rotation pretty well. And a lot of times what that means, and this has happened in more schools than it hasn't happened, schools have decided, we're going to take down our labs. We are going to do station rotation with Fidelity. We have this beautiful bank of computers that's sitting in a room that gets used half of the time. So we're gonna take our labs down, and we're gonna put those machines in every classroom, so that every classroom has that 1 to 3. So there's a lot of times it ends up being a bank of computers of 10 computers on a wall. So one of the stations, every child has a device to work on, and that seems to be working. So a lot of times, when I'm working with schools, they'll say, oh, we can never be a blended learning school because we can't afford a 1-to-1. And I always say, well, let's look at the devices that you already have, and let's see how we can maybe restructure and reorganize a little bit, because you might be closer to a 1 to 3 than you really think that you are initially. And then, you're looking at your content providers and your devices, and then you got to figure out, what are you going to do? Every school that I've worked with, I take them through the process of, let's learn what station rotation is. Let's learn what Flex is. Let's learn what the lab model is. Let's look at the flipped classroom. Every school that I've worked with has decided that station rotation is the best way to go and to start. I still use the station rotation model in my middle school reading class that I teach. And blended learning is great, because I can come and do great things like today and tomorrow and be gone, and my students are still learning and working. And in fact, we'll have subs that will come into our building and say, do we really have to be here? Because the kids just kind of seem to know what they need to do, and we're just not really doing anything. I said, yes, you do, because it's a liability issue. I need to have an adult in the room, but they actually enjoy coming in because the kids are so driven and know exactly what they need to do. And it's nice for teachers, because sub-plans, if you're just going to be gone for a day, sometimes as a teacher you think, it's not worth even being gone, because those sub-plans are going to be a nightmare. But with the blended learning, just a day or two, it really allows the teacher to do some other things. And, if they're sick, I don't want them in my building. I want them to stay home. And the blended learning allows them to be able to do that a little bit better. So every school has started with the station rotation model. Our school has kind of drifted away from that now, because we recognize that out of, a classroom of 20 students, I couldn't really break them up into thirds anymore, because if I was addressing all of their learning needs, there's really probably 20 different groups that should be happening in the classroom at one time. So we're in our 5th year, And we do more of a flex model where the teacher is pulling 1 to 2 or 3 students at a time, or maybe individually. The rest of the class is using their time, and it's split between, and we have the one-to-one, so it allows us to do that, where they're working on their device at their desk, or they're getting in their groups and working on their projects or their other seek work that needs to be done. But I would encourage you to, for your school, and to get that staff buy-in to vet all of those different models. There's a great website called blendmylearning.com, and it really gives you a nice overview. Different models are, and there's some great videos as well as going into some blended learning schools and really like showing you what it looks like. I know Andrea has said so many times, oh, I wish when we had started this that there was something out there, because once we saw it at InnoAcademy, it clicked, and we were like, we can do that. We're not going to be exactly like them because each school has its own identity, but once teachers seem to see it in action, it becomes much more tangible and much more realistic for them to pull off. So if you don't have the luxury of going and visiting other blended learning schools, that blendmylearning.com website has a lot of great resources to use and to preview when it comes to the blended learning.
I also said I wish somebody would have come to me, because even though, and Kendra did, which was great in the end, because when we went to InnoAcademy and we saw it, and we loved what was going on, and we knew that we wanted to do something like that, but we knew that we were different, like Kendra said, and it wasn't exact. So having Kendra come in and show us how we can do it with what we have as an individual is really important. A lot of teachers that visit us say, where's the book? And I'm like, there's not a book. And their eyes get kind of big and they get nervous because they just want us to hand them over a manual. And there's not a manual, because all of your schools are different. Your students are different, your staff is different, some of your resources are different, your locations are different, which things like internet and devices can really impact that. And even between our 2 buildings, we're very connected, but we have some private auctions and donors that donate just to that one building that their parents went to, their grandparents went to, their grandkids go to, and it's more of a legacy process, and they want their money for that building. So that even means one building might have some things that another building doesn't have because of money, because of placement. So just recognizing that all of your buildings may not look the same, and it's okay, because we're getting equal results and we're getting great results, but we're just smartly working with what we have.
Again, you know, between the 2 buildings, we've consolidated the things that it made sense to consolidate, sharing some leadership and sharing some teachers and some practices and things like that. Then, like Andrea said, having their own identity is an okay thing too. We have kind of the overall school culture is the same, but how the day-to-day operations happen looks a little bit different in every building. And when people come to visit our schools, I really encourage them to visit both campuses, because if they don't resonate with one, they're probably going to resonate with the other, because they're just different, and it's a good difference. Yeah. So at blended, you know, for blended learning at Divine Providence Academy, we've embraced the statement, in the 21st century, it is more important to learn to do and to learn to be than to learn to know. And that was a big shift for a lot of our parents, because they went to a rigorous Catholic school that demanded that they memorize lots of things, and what they could regurgitate back determined their grade and how successful they were in school. But in the 21st century, technology has changed things. And at InnoAcademy, I was actually hired to start InnoAcademy by a group of global businessmen that said, we can't have kids that just come out of colleges even and wait for us to tell them how to do their job. They need to be able to be problem solvers and critical thinkers, and be able to do and learn to exist without someone telling them every minute what they're supposed to be doing. And so we've kind of embraced that and said, you're right, that for our families, and I'll say this to them, I'll say, you're right, the education that you had worked great for you, but times have changed. And this is what we're recognizing as a skill set that needs to be instilled and nourished in our students. And so for us, our definition of blended learning, our philosophy at our school, and I encourage all schools to kind of come up with a statement that is unique to them. We offer individualized, personalized learning for every student through the use of both the classroom teacher and supportive technology. We took our schools from having zero technology to having a lot of technology, and that freaked a lot of parents out because it was a huge shift. And I heard when I first came on, I got stopped so many times by different parents that would put their finger, and some of them right in my face, and say, I do not want my child to be on a computer all day. And I said, I respect that. I do not want my children to be on the computer all day. That's not what this is about. But that was a fear that they had. And so it really helped us to kind of define that. So even for my staff when they were talking to parents, and even for our parents to talk to other parents about what it meant to be a blended learning school, was to address the fact that we use technology as a tool. It is never going to replace the teacher. It just helps the teacher work smarter, and it helps the kids learn faster. So for us, the percent of their instructional day, our kindergarten through second grade uses their technology, their device. It's a 20-25% of their day is with a computer. And we feel for us and for the population that we're serving, that's an appropriate amount of time. That might not be the case in every school, and that's okay. And that's different, but for us, this is what works.
We started higher and there was burnout with the younger kids. They just could only sit on one thing and sustain it for so long. And so by paring it down, we've seen better results and more interest from the students when it comes time to do those things as well.
Our third through fifth grade, they're, kind of around 40% of their day might be with their device. And that doesn't just mean they're sitting in front of the computer and they're learning from the computer. That's far from it. But using things like Google Classroom and looking at the subject areas that we use the supportive technology for, that seems to be a good fit for them. And the middle schoolers, and this has held true for all the middle school classrooms I've been in. And like I said, I started really getting into blended learning in 2007, and it really hasn't changed. Middle schoolers will tell you what they think. And when asked, they strongly emphasize the fact that they don't want more than about half of their day learning from the computer or using it as a tool. It is their social needs are so important to them that it's really important that you find the time for them to have that whole group time, that small group time to collaborate and work together. And they said too, just, working on the computer all day is too much. It's too much for me. I mean, I can't sit in my office on my computer all day. Even if there's other things going on, I need to get up, I need to move around, I need to do things. So that seems to be kind of a nice blend for us. They're using their computer in all of their classes, but we've just been very mindful as a staff to say, how much are you going to focus on the computer in your class? Okay, well then I'm going to back off a little bit, and we have those conversations so that the kids don't get that burnout. Because in our community is the last thing, especially after the finger shaking in the face, the last thing I want is kids going home and telling their parents they hate the computer and they're on it all day. So, you have to look at what is right for the population that you serve. All right, so you can just click them all. So we talk about how is excellence measured. You've got those 7 levers, blended learning being one of them, school culture, data-driven. These are the kinds of things that when I'm working with the school, and Divine Providence included, these are the things that we're looking at to determine how excellent a school really is. Looking at the national, some nationally normed standardized tests. We use NWEA MAP, doesn't have to be that. But that's an important part of looking at how a school stacks up. The financial health, the attainment of college acceptance and graduation rates. For us, we use the ACRE. It's a big part. We're a Catholic school. We embrace Catholic identity. We want our kids to be doing really well on that ACRE assessment. And then character is a big deal for us as well. And how do we measure that and what do we look for? So I want to talk to you, I picked 4 schools that I work with, and I kind of want to share with you where they are in the journey, their demographic that they're serving, because I don't believe that blended learning is just for one type of school. I think blended learning, when done with fidelity, will benefit every single school that's out there. And all of these schools are significantly different. So Divine Providence Academy, very rural. When I came on fall of 2012, we took those MAPS tests, and we had 57% of our kids were proficient in math, and 62% of our students were proficient in reading. And proficient for us at that time was that they were at that 50th percentile or higher. So that even kills me, because I'm like, oh, only half of our kids were average. So that was a hard, and when we took the time to look at that, that was a shocker. And Andrea kind of touched on that for a lot of our students, because we had a lot of pride and we thought that our kids were awesome. But when push came to shove, we could see that there was a lot of room for growth. You look at our school now and we're super excited where we stand. We have special education students that have individualized education plans just like everybody else. Those marks are still at the 50th percentile, but we have since raised the bar. There's some research that has come out that says kids that consistently score in the 80th percentile or higher have a much more, a higher chance of success in college. So we've kind of raised our own bar, and yours is 60%. We're saying ours needs to be 80. Knowing that not all of our kids are going to go to college, and that's okay. A lot of them are going to go to work on the farm. But we want them to be more likely to succeed if they do choose that option. So we've raised the bar there, and right now we're at about 70% or so of our students are at that 80th percentile or higher. So we're on our way, we're making gains, but we recognize that there's still room to grow. And we're very mindful. You saw a lot of blue on our data wall, and that's great, but we didn't ever want to see learning plateau for our students. And so we kind of raised our bar and we're shooting for that next level. Immaculate Conception School, there is one white student in that entire school, very impoverished neighborhood right outside of Minneapolis. I think there's 7 different languages that are spoken at the homes of that school. And knowing where they started, they have the slowest pace of change of the schools that I work with. That's okay, because it's still, you're still seeing, that's after their first year. There was still a little bit of an uptick. They did not adopt blended learning quite as quickly. In fact, they started, really slow, and I think they started and they said, 1 time a week in 1 class, we're going to implement station rotation. But think about it, 1 time a week in 1 class, they still were able to see a jump in their scores. So their pace was much slower than any of the other schools, but they still saw an uptick. So why wouldn't you go to blended learning? That's what I like to think about with this school. Why wouldn't you? It's not going to hurt anything. Our Lady of the Lake, very affluent area it's Mound, Minnesota. The owner of Best Buy, his grandchildren go to that school. So money is not a issue there. They've got a great donor base.
Great technology, I would think.
Great technology at their fingertips. Whatever they need, they can get. They started out saying, we're going to do blended learning. We're going to do station rotation. in our classrooms 3 times a week. And they picked the area, I have to think. They picked the area of math to focus on. So they said in all of our math classrooms, we're gonna do blended learning station rotation 3 times a week. So the other 2 times a week, we're doing the whole group. I'm teaching 1 lesson to the whole class, and we're gonna do it 3 times a week. And they had great scores. They saw an uptick. Think if they were doing it every day in their classrooms. And you look at where they started, and money is not an issue for that school, but still only 72 and 76% of their kids were at the 50th percentile or higher. Definitely room to grow there as well. And then St. Therese, similar demographic to Our Lady of the Lake. They're probably about 20 minutes from each other in Minnesota. They focused primarily on the area of reading. And so, and they did both, but all their professional development and things. So that they were doing 3 times a week, blended learning in math and reading, but their professional development also focused completely on reading. So, you know, the teacher tools and what should the teacher be doing at that small group station was very literacy driven. And they saw a significant uptick in reading as well. So the effects of a comprehensive approach. So these are all schools that looked at their school culture, they're data driven, and then kind of where they went after the blended learning. Do you have any questions about that? Okay.
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you get your data solely from standardized tests?
So depends on what the schools are using. All of the 4 schools highlighted there, they all use NWEA maps. So it's easy to compare them to each other. I have some schools that are using the Terra Nova, and I have some, and all of the schools that I'm working with right now have adopted the iReady in the areas of math and reading. So that gives us a lot of normed information as well. There's diagnostic tests that the students are supposed to take 3 times a year for that as well. So it really depends on the school, what we're using. It is all standardized, yep. So we do surveys with all the schools that we work with, and we're trying to find commonalities because we're all adopting, you know, kind of those 7 things. Schools that have really embraced that comprehensive approach with the blended learning, like that being data driven in their school culture, they noted a significant rise in their rigor. They could confidently say that they were offering challenging academic programs. They saw an uptick in the expectations of what quality work was, and a significant rise in a shared vision in the school, so that they felt that it was a collaborative effort. Everybody was working towards the same thing, not just necessarily I go in my room and I do the thing with the students that I have, but that it was a shared vision for the entire school. The 4 things that they recognized that they saw an increase in both knowledge, so not only learning more about what those things are, as well as the value that they add to the school program. The 4 things that they felt were the most beneficial were getting to be better at differentiated instruction, using blended learning as a philosophy, the data-driven instruction, and the instructional coaching. So not only knowing more about it, but seeing how the value adds to the classroom. The 2 most effective practices, classroom management. Andrea touched on this a little bit. Every school that I worked with has seen a decrease in behavior problems. Principals have said, I am making way less phone calls home than I have before. So the principals are like, oh, that frees me up to do other things. Because if students aren't bored or they're not frustrated, a lot of those behaviors start to go away. And it makes a huge impact. And teachers felt that their classroom management, and it's kind of scary at first as a teacher if you're thinking, oh, I'm going to like having them all in front of me where I'm kind of in control, and I'm going to break them up into small groups, and they're going to be rotating, and it could be just organized chaos, and I'm not sure how this is going to look. At the end of the year, they all said that they felt that there was a significant improvement in their classroom management, and that they were much more effective using blended learning as part of their classroom management practice than not using it. One to me is my favorite, because I don't know many people that didn't go into education to not make a difference in the life of a child. And so if I have schools from all over the United States that are saying one of the most effective practices that they were able to do as teachers as a result of blended learning was to foster those positive student to teacher relationships. Andrea, do you feel like you know your students better now than you did a few years ago?
So well, I mean, if you were to pick any student, I could tell you where they're at, maybe not only academically, but I think social and emotionally. And I think that is maybe one growth that we haven't talked about. But this model can actually help students really grow socially and emotionally as well, and making sure they're properly placed for those things. You know, when you're teaching that one lesson to a group of students, you can say, I know where they are because of their test scores. I know where they are because of their homework that they turn in and how they perform on it. I know where they are from their daily work, but you don't really have that relationship with them. It's a little more platonic, and I feel it's a little more personal because I care about their personal education. I know where they're at in so many different places, and I know where I need to put my most effort in for each individual child. And sometimes that's math, and sometimes that's reading, and sometimes that's social, and sometimes that's emotional, and sometimes it's all of them. And that's okay too. But it's important to know, and again, so we're using time wisely, and we're not just investing things into students that they don't need when they really need some other things.
I have a teacher who has lots of family that has gone through the St. Joseph campus, including great-grandmas and great-grandpas, and now she's a teacher there. And she's Italian. She's very loud. And she would stand up in front of you today and loudly say, and she's been teaching 25, 30 years. She would loudly, and with her Italian, her hands waving probably, she would say, if I had to go back to the old way of doing things, I would quit. Because she sees the value in this so much. And she says, at night, I go home and I pray for the kids that I had in my classroom before blended learning, because I don't feel like I served them, and I get emotional when I say this, that I served them the best way that I could. Were her kids great? Yes, they were fine. She did not do them harm by not doing blended learning. But to her, she feels so professionally fulfilled by recognizing the value that this has added to her classroom and her ability to make a difference in the lives of her students. Here's my contact information, and we'll make sure that we send this out to you as well. So if you want to use it, you can. We left some time for question and answer. So if anybody wants specifics, we're happy to address those.
How did you bring in like project-based kinds of things? I mean, you didn't say too much about that, but you said 21st century skills, so I assume it's in there somewhere.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about like one of the things I'm doing right now with my reading class as far as project-based, and then Andrea can talk a little bit about what she's done too. But one of the examples is I really work with my students to recognize that they all have strengths and they all have weaknesses, and all of our brains are not wired the same way. And so we do a lot of multiple intelligence work with our students and talking about what kind of learner are you and how do you best learn. And so part of their reading project right now that they're working on, some of them are working in groups because they read the same text. Some of them are working individually because they read different texts, but the project time, they're allowed to collaborate and share ideas and help each other out. I've given them 24 different options as far as a culminating project to prove to me that they read and they understood their book. And those 24 projects are aligned to the multiple intelligences. So for my kids that are really strong in music, I have one student who made his own music video about his book. And then he'll show it to the class, and then I'll conference with him and ask questions, and we'll kind of meet and discuss how he came to where he did with that. I have another one for some of my kids are writing newspaper articles about their book, but just really trying to give them an opportunity to show what they know, and not just me telling them how they're going to do that.
I've done a lot of them reading based because I love reading, I love books. But one of them that I really enjoyed last year, and I did it with a group of 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. We had been studying regions of the United States. And I think projects are pretty easy when it comes to social studies. But I did one tying in social studies with reading. So I like to do it really naturally and try to tie stuff in if possible. We had a reading assignment or a writing assignment where we had to write a chapter book. That's right, a chapter book about something, obviously nonfiction historically. And so we took the regions and they chose their region. They chose what they wanted to write about in their chapters. They researched it. We researched it in books. We researched it on the internet. We spent a lot of time on internet skills and appropriate use of information that you find on the internet, not Wikipedia. Valuable sites and invaluable sites. And they spent a lot of time on it, and there was not a lot of wasted time. They were more excited about that writing assignment, about that social studies, than anything we did all year. And I think they learned more about the region that they chose and the region that other students chose from seeing their work and hearing their work than they did through the whole social studies year not doing a project. So that really stood out to me, that they were excited about it. They had learned so much on their own, more than we would have learned just by, a traditional setting, and I was able to tie it into their writing. And they produced, especially for 3rd graders, fantastic pieces of writing that were chapter books, like real chapters. We had introductions, we had conclusions, we had so many parts, but that sounded very daunting to me as a teacher, to have a 3rd grader write a chapter book with introductions and a conclusion and chapters in between. And so I really thought about how I wanted to tackle it. And I knew it was going to take a lot of time. And so tying it in with another subject and giving them a lot of freedom to enjoy what they were doing produced a better result than some other things in the past.
What was kind of the timeline on that project? How did you implement that in the classroom? Just kind of briefly, but how many months did it take in a school year? How many days?
We spent about a month and a half on it.
About a month and a half.
But we spent time every day.
And you spent time every day.
Because we were tying in our writing and our social studies. And there were many lessons within there. It wasn't just you're writing. We tackled sections at a time and pieces at a time. So making sure it was really structured too. When we focused on, introductions, what goes in an introduction, we spent a lot of time on that. Then we went into, then they did their individual research and their work. Then we came back. And so tackling it a piece at a time, so they weren't also left out on an island too. So making it attainable for them to be successful in chunks to put it together. Yes.
Do you have any expectations or requirements in terms of the pacing of the rotation? For example, is a teacher required to meet with, for the instructional part of the rotation, are they required to meet with every student 3 times a week, or what is the pace of the rotation? You rotate everybody every day? You do,
in our building, yes. Some of the other schools
per class
are a little bit different. There was a time, and Father called me crazy, we were talking about much, but I was teaching 19 math lessons a day. And then I went on maternity leave, and we realized that wasn't realistic for everybody because it was really hard to write lesson plans for that. But meeting with students on a regular basis, when I think about when I pull them individually for reading, a minimum 3 times is my preference. So I know what they're reading and we're having continuing conversations about that. But again, that's more of our individual pace. When I look at station rotation, and it's smaller groups, you're meeting with students every day in those stations.
So if you're blending in math, then you would meet with, in that math period, they would rotate to all three.
Yeah.
In that one period.
Yeah, ideally, yes. But if you only have a 45-minute math period, I mean, that's where, when I work with principals, we tend to like revamp the daily schedule. Because we recommend, you know, I've found it to be successful for math if there's an hour and a half block of time, because that allows you transition time in between your stations and you're getting a decent chunk. And so that's, and the same for reading is what we do.
We do the same thing. We went to block schedule, not schedule. We did the block schedule as well because the exact same reason that you just said, is that you just can't do the rotation and you want to do it. So every time they get together, you want to do rotation. So we change schedule, but we can do that when we're in charge of the whole schedule.
Yeah.
So that's why that worked.
And you know, as teachers get more comfortable with the process, I have teachers that utilize tricks that they say, you know what, I meet with my struggling kids first every day because I want to make sure I am connecting with them every day. Some of my kids that are doing really well and can be a bit more independent with some tasks, they don't need to meet with me every day, and that's okay. Because it doesn't mean that they're not growing in their learning. If I'm giving them the right tasks and projects to work on, they're gonna make gains as well. So it's kind of like, you know, that debate between what's fair and what's equal. Equal time isn't always fair, depending on, you look at the dynamic of your class and what they're able to do. Some kids can work really well independently for a class period without necessarily meeting with the teacher and then seeing the teacher the next day. Some kids need to see the teacher every day. Anything else? Brains are fried, we're done. You kind of have like that glassy-eyed deer in the headlights. Blend, I'm sorry?
Are you guys blending every subject area right now?
No. I'm encouraging teachers to start blending every subject. We're really pushing into science and social studies, but our focus for the last 4 years has been completely math and reading. And that's usually where I encourage schools to start, is with those. Get the basics right and the rest will come. And we found that, yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, the reading tends to blend into the other subjects and the things that you're doing, or the ELA in general, like I talked about blending or with a writing project and being part of social studies and things like that. So even tying those subjects in together and being able to do it that way.
I think it's important to recognize, you know, math doesn't always just have to be during math time. If I'm gonna set up a station rotation during social studies, I can incorporate one of those stations can be some math time as well. So when we talk about project-based, it's that multidisciplinary subjects together to incorporate the project learning like Andrew did with the social studies and the literacy pieces. Donna, oh, I see another question.
Are you using a learning management system then at your building?
So we have Infinite Campus, and that's our student management system. And then we're using iReady and Newsela, and then that Holt McDougall, Go Math. I'm trying to think what else. Reading A to Z. So we can't afford it. It's not in our budget, and so we've kind of come up with a system that works for us without the learning management system.
Who made the decisions on those iReady and Newsela?
I think we all did. Dave Faber, which we talked about a little bit this morning, our superintendent, who had a really rough start, mostly through not his own fault. He was really thrown into the lion's den and told, tell everybody this. He gave us a lot of freedom because he knew that we needed it to be successful, because he knew we didn't have to do everything else that the diocese was doing. So like I said, it was a lot of trial and error. And we talk about things as a staff regularly. Even if we've been using something for a while, we talk about, is it still applicable? Is it still working for us? Do we need something new? And we tried a lot of things, and we keep a lot of things, and we get rid of a lot of things. But I think it's a lot of dialogue, because your leader can tell you, this is great, I've heard about it, it's working for other people, you use it. But the principal, the administrators, they're not using it in the classroom every day. Except for Kendra, who does teach as well. But she doesn't teach all of the subjects. So she goes to the teachers who really are the experts because they're using it every day to know if it is working for their students, for their school. And it's different for everyone. Something that works for one of the schools might not work for another school and a teacher in a classroom. And so keeping open dialogue about that and making sure that you're spending your time and your money wisely and not wasting things that you're using.
You know, every day there's new products that are being offered for blended learning. And so you got to stay up on the blogs and the research to kind of see what's new and great, but what's proven to be successful. So as the leader, what I did is I identified the ones we could afford. And then I brought those to my staff and I said, these. So we looked at DreamBox and we looked at iReady because we knew we could afford those two things. And I had the teachers then each pilot and kind of work together in dialogue about what was great and what needed to be improved. And then we made our decision at that point on what was going to work best for our school.
So just on that, there are, that's where the professional learning communities play a big role in learning out where's the best products used. The also thing is I'd offer to you is we own an organization called CTN in San Jose. It's a combination between our two dioceses. And we basically have purchasing order with all the major providers. We get major discounts, but we buy in bulk for hundreds of schools. So if you want to call them, we can throw you in. It can be anywhere in the country. But basically, we force the prices down because we buy in bulk. So that's one of the systemic things we get when you buy, and we don't charge anything else. We just want schools to use the stuff. So.
Are you offering it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, anyone. It's a purchasing agreement we get with these companies. We can't publish the numbers, nor will you be allowed to publish the numbers. You get the price of that because we bundle packages. So the prices, we have to protect their pricing strategy. So we have to bundle it with something. So you'll get it hidden in something, but you won't be able to see the price or neither will they. But it's going to be better than the price you get. Trust me, like that. It's business. Just trust me. It's the right way to do it.
Teachers say we always beg, borrow, and steal, so we're going to borrow some of that from you.
Yeah, and that's the way to go because we did, we got the iReady costs significantly down because we were able to bring more schools on. And if you can do it that way, they're a lot more willing to work with you if you're bringing the numbers. So,
and spreading the word. Yeah.
And spreading the word. Yep.
Thank you, and I would like to round of applause for our three presenters. With all this wonderful information that's been provided for us today, we are going to be putting together a committee. Blended committee. So I know all of you are going to be lined up outside the door and tell me that you want to be on our committee for the Archdiocese of Omaha. Because of all the things that we've learned, we want to move forward with it. And we all know that we want to all survive and we want to do what's the best practice for education. Ironically, I was sharing with you guys over lunch that I did station rotation in 1983 when I was in education. And I was in education for 10 years and then I stepped out and I went into city government for 14 years. And so when I came back into education, and I was not in, what I was seeing was not small group instruction and went back to whole group instruction. It just didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. So the world in which I knew in education is now back again in education, just didn't have that technology component in 1983. So a little bit of a difference there. So thank you so much for spending your day with us. I truly, truly appreciate it. Hopefully we get to see a lot of your faces tonight at the Archbishop's dinner. Otherwise, hopefully I get to see you tomorrow. If you did not sign up and request to be a part of tomorrow's panel discussion from 9 to 11, please still feel free to come. If you have a lot more questions to ask, we kind of set it up over our 1 o'clock or noon break as to what it's going to look like. It's going to be a lot of question answer time for you on what's the next steps. And then we want to put the committee together on helping all of us get together on those next steps, as well as taking advantage of all the things that have been shared with us and the buying power of Father McGuire we're all going to jump on. So again, thank you so much for your time today, and hopefully we see you tomorrow or yet tonight.